Hello my fellow working class heroes, good day. I am Carlo and welcome to Carlo Excels. These are the objectives of this episode. First, we're going to talk about Excel's basic calculations, and then basic calculations using constants, and then basic calculations using variables. Later on, we're going to talk about mixed constant and variables calculations, and then we're going to talk about quick calculations of large amounts of data, and lastly, the weaknesses of basic calculations. During a previous lesson video, we already talked about the entries that you can put on cells. So you have your formula entries and then you have your data entries. We already talked about, to some degree, text data and values data. So now we're gonna move on to formula entries, starting with the basic formulas. So, how do you tell Excel that you are going to make a calculation? By simply using the equal sign, alright? Anytime you you enter any entry that starts with an equal sign, that is always a signal to Microsoft Excel that this entry is not going to be just simple text or value data. This is going to be a formula, either a calculation or a function. So let me tell you first off that calculations can only be done with value data. We cannot do calculations with text data, at least in the normal sense. You can calculate text data, you can use text data in calculations, but there are specific functions and methods and procedures that you have to do for you to be able to do that, alright? As far as value data is concerned, basic calculations can be done on them. First of all, what do I mean when I say basic calculations? Basic calculations are those calculations that do not necessarily need any special function of Microsoft Excel. You have linking, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, exponents, roots, and of course, the grouping of calculations. So first of all, what is linking? Linking is when you tell Microsoft Excel that the value of this cell is the value of some other cell. So what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, that you have cell A1, as you can see on the screen right now. You have cell A1, and whatever the value is on cell A1, you want it to also be the value on cell B1. So much so that whatever changes happens to cell A1, it will also appear in cell B1. So what do? What you do is, on cell B1, either on the formula bar or you can type it directly, you can simply put there the equal sign. So again, that is a signal for Microsoft Excel that this is going to be a calculation, or this is going to be a formula or a calculation. And then once you press the equal sign, all you have to do is to either you type the cell address that you want to link to, for example, in this case, A1, then you will notice that A1 has already changed in color, and then you already have highlighted the A1 symbol over here, and then press enter, alright? Or you can do it this way. You can press the equal sign, and then you can click on the cell that you want to link to. So in this case, I want to link to A1, so I will just click on A1 and it will do the same thing. Then when I press enter, you will notice now that B1 is now linked to A1. So because of the linking, any entries that you do to cell A1 will also appear in cell B1, whether it be text or value. Say for example, I enter here the value of 123, and when I press enter, you will notice that B1 will also have the value of 123. If I put in a value here, let's say for example, I type in here value, I mean text. If I type in here Pedro, you will also notice that Pedro will also appear in cell B1. That is what cell linking is. Let me tell you beforehand that special conditions apply when you start to move these cells around. Say for example, there are certain things that happen when I copy B1, cell B1, of course with the linked formula. When I copy cell B1 to somewhere else, or when I copy or even cut cell A1 to somewhere else, the things or the intricacies of cutting, copying, pasting cells in Microsoft Excel will be discussed in a future lesson. Alright, now that we're done with basic linking, let's talk about the other calculations such as adding, subtracting, multiplying, etc. In Microsoft Excel, there are two ways that you can do basic calculations. You can either do them as constants or you can do them as variables. First, let's talk about calculating with constants. When I say calculating with constants, what I mean is, when you calculate with constants, these constants do not change no matter what happens to the values of the other cells of the worksheet or workbook. So I guess the best way to explain it is to actually show you. So let's do a constant adding calculation, alright? So press on cell A1 and then you press on the equal sign again to tell Microsoft Excel this is gonna be a formula. So let's add 1 plus 1. Alright, so just type in, very simple, 1 plus 1, like so. Alright, These are two constants, 1 and 1. When you press enter, you have 2. Alright, this is what I mean when I say calculation of constants. We call them constants because the 1 and the 1 in that formula will not change no matter what other conditions happen throughout the worksheet. No matter what you type in any other cell, 1 plus 1 will not change because it is not linked to any other cell. Now let's do a basic subtraction calculation. So to do a subtraction calculation, what you do is, again, equal sign to connote a formula, and then let's have 2 minus 1, like so. So 2, type 2, then dash, then 1, and then press enter. And when you press enter, then you have, of course, the result 1. Still a constants calculation. Alright, let's try multiplication. Let's try 2 times 3, alright? To do multiplication, you use the asterisk symbol. So 2 times 3, like so, and the answer will be 6. Then let's try division. Division is connoted by using the slash symbol, alright? So let's try basic 6 divided by 3. So you do it by typing 6 slash 3. So that's 6 divided by 3, and the answer will be 2. Next, how do you perform exponent calculations in Microsoft Excel? You use the Knuth symbol. When I say the Knuth up arrow or Knuth power symbol, this is how you spell it. And to be honest, I do not know how to pronounce it. Knuth. But when I watch other videos, it's pronounced Knuth. So you use the Knuth power symbol. So what symbol is this? It's this one. Alright? It's the up arrow. In a standard keyboard, you will find it above the number 6 on your keyboard. Alright? So this is how you do a power symbol. So say for example, you want to have 10 raised to 2 or 10 to the power of 2, or in other words, that's 10 times 10, right? So 10, this is how you do it. 10 to the power of raised to 2, and then when you press enter, you will have the answer, which is 100. Of course, you can have much bigger exponents than that. For example, let's try 123 to the power of 123. Of course, not forgetting the equal symbol. And then let's try, what's gonna be the answer to that? Alright, I guess in this case, the answer is so big that it's already changed into a scientific notation. So that's 1.1437 times 10 to the power of 257. So how do you do root calculations in Microsoft Excel? To do root calculations, you will still have to use the Knuth power symbol. I hope you remember your math lessons. We're gonna do a quick review. Please remember that roots are simply exponents in a fraction form. So, say for example, if you have 2 raised to 2, alright, so that's like saying 2 squared, alright? If you have 2 raised to 3, that's like saying 2 cubed, right? Or when you say 2 raised to 4, that's 2 to the power of 4. However, if you want to do square roots, please remember that it works this way, right? If you want, say for example, the square root of 100, alright, we already know it's 10, but you know, in Microsoft Excel, how do you do square root of 100? You raise it to the power of 1/2, alright? When you do 1/2, please enclose it in a parenthesis. Why? Because if you write it this way, what Microsoft Excel is going to think is, it's going to think this way. It's going to think this is 100 raised to 1, and then 100 raised to 1 divided by 2, which is not what we want. This is what we want. So, okay, let's try it for real this time. So, equal sign, 100 raised to the power of 1/2. This is square root, and when you press enter, we have 10, alright? Just for concept, proof of concept, what happens if I do this? What's going to happen is you will have 50, because that is 100 raised to the power of 1, which is still 100, divided by 2 equals 50. So this of course works with other roots as well. So for example, you have 10,000, alright, or wait, 10,000 to the fourth root of 10,000. So what you do is that you raise this to the power of 1/4. Diba in math, that is how you write, you know, the fourth root. So enter, then you still have the answer 10. You can of course do multiple constant calculations together. For example, you have 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, the answer will be 10. Or you can have, for example, 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, and the answer will be 24. and so on and so forth. But what if you do a mix of different basic calculations in just one equation? In that case, my dear viewers, Microsoft Excel does indeed use the PEMDAS rule. So the PEMDAS rule in mathematics, or sometimes called the GEMS rule, is as follows. You start first with any calculations that are enclosed in parentheses or any grouping symbols, and then you move over to exponents. Afterwards, you do multiplication and division, and lastly, you do addition and subtraction. So if you have, for example, 8 plus 8 minus 8 times 8 raised to 8, divided by 8 raised to 8, the answer is going to be 16. Why is that so? This is how Microsoft Excel is going to resolve this. So Microsoft Excel is going to look at the exponent first and gonna solve that first, and then is going to take this equation next, all right? Because, you know, multiplication and division, and then that is when Microsoft Excel is going to resolve this part, which is 8 plus 8 minus 8. Now, when doing basic calculations in Microsoft Excel, it can get very confusing if you try to have Microsoft Excel resolve PEMDAS rule by itself. I highly suggest that you use the parentheses. Using the parentheses is like telling Microsoft Excel that do this calculation first, all right? So if I use for example, parentheses in resolving this equation, so let's try it from the very beginning, all right? 8 plus 8 minus 8 times 8 divided by 8 raised to 8. If I do it the way I want to do it, say for example, I want to resolve 8 plus 8 first, this is how you do it. And then you want to resolve 8 minus, whatever the result is, minus 8 next. You enclose that in a parenthesis. And you will notice that Microsoft Excel has now changed the colors of the parentheses to connote that these two parentheses are, of course, grouped together or linked together. Then you want to resolve the next part. This is how you write it down. So you have 3 parentheses together, all right? And then you resolve the next part like so, and then you resolve the last part. In that case, you don't have to enclose that in a parenthesis anymore because that is the last part. And the answer will be, I do not know, let's try. That is going to be the answer. So why did I have to go through constants calculation? Because knowing the calculation of constants is key to understanding the calculation of variables. In algebra, you have, of course, variables, right? For example, you have x plus y in algebra. We call them variables because x can be any value and y can be any value. We do not know the value yet of x or y. That's why we connote them or we write them as x plus y. Because that says that whatever the value of x is and whatever the value of y is, we will eventually add them together. So that's algebra, that's variables calculation, and the same concepts apply to Microsoft Excel. But in the case of Microsoft Excel, instead of using x plus y, we use cell references or cell addresses. So let's say, for example, I want to enter a value in A1. Let's say I'm gonna enter the value of 2, and then I'm gonna enter a value of 3 in cell B1. What I want to do is, I want to add the value of 2 and 3 together. Also, I want the calculation to change depending on the values that I set in cell A1 and cell B1. So how do I do that? I perform basic calculations, but instead of using constants, I use variables, or in this case, I use the cell addresses. And to do that, very simple. So again, I use the equal sign to tell Microsoft Excel this is going to be a formula. And then I write down, either I type down manually the cell address A1, like so, and then I use the addition number, the addition symbol plus sign, and then I can either type B1, which is the cell address manually, or I can click on B1, like so. When I press enter, you will already have 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, which is A1 plus B1 is equal to 5. That's kind of like x plus y, wherein x is 2 and y is 3. And the beauty, of course, of calculating or using cell references is this. If I change the value of cell A1 to, for example, 41, you will notice that we do not have to change whatever is in cell C1 anymore, because cell C1's answer will change depending on what we type in cell A1 and B1. like so. Alright, you want to do subtraction? Simple. Instead of A1 plus B1, so you have A1 minus B1, like so. And that's your answer. Of course, if you want A1 times B1, so same thing. So A1 times B1, and that's your answer. If you want division, of course, you can have equal A1 divided by slash B1, and that's your answer. Or if you want to have an exponent, you can do it like this. So A1 raised to the power of B1. That's gonna be a huge number, but let's try. So A1 using the Knuth up arrow symbol again. So A1 raised to the power of B1, and that's your answer. Now, how do we do root calculations in this case? Same concept. All you have to do is equals A1 raised to the power of, okay, we want this to be a fraction, right? So we want this to be root of B2, so B1. So, sorry, I don't know how to say that really in mathematics, oral mathematics. So you do it like this, 1 over B1, and that is how you do the root. So when you press enter, that is your answer. Alright, now that we're done with the basics, let's do something fun now. So on the screen right now are fictional names of students, just like what we usually use. In this case, we now have fictional scores of 5 quizzes. Alright, let's try adding all of these together using the concepts that you already learned a few minutes ago. So what we do is, again, press equal sign to connote a formula. And then you have cell B2 plus cell C2 plus cell D2 plus cell E2 plus cell F2 is equal to, that is the sum of these 5 quizzes for this student. Now, if you want to keep adding the quizzes of the other students, you want to copy this equation. You don't have to keep on doing the equation over and over again, meaning you don't have to keep on doing this process over and over again, and there are 200 students here, so you don't have to do the same thing 200 times. All you will have to do actually in Microsoft Excel is to copy the cell which has the formula that you want in this case, and then you just paste it somewhere else. The beauty of Microsoft Excel is this: when you copy a cell to another, Microsoft Excel actually already intelligently adjusts the references. So much so that you will see here, because Microsoft Excel adds all of these cell references together, when you copy paste down one space, Microsoft Excel also, of course, adjusts all the cell references down one space. So essentially, what you can actually do with Microsoft Excel is you can, of course, copy this and then scroll down, highlight that, paste all of that together, and then you have, of course, sum of all of the students, and you can do that in just seconds. Alright, let's do averaging. If you remember, averaging is where you add all of the elements, and then whatever the sum is, you divide it by the number of elements. So in this case, we can do it like this. For example, you wanna add this divided by plus this, plus this, plus this, plus this, divided by 5, and then that's your answer. But unfortunately, that's not the correct answer. Why? Because remember that Microsoft Excel uses the PEMDAS rule. In other words, if you look at the formula up top here, I hope you can see it, what Microsoft Excel actually does is it resolves F2 over 5 first. Alright? So it resolves this equation first before it will then add all of the other cell references. So what you want to do is, because you want the addition to happen first, you will have to use a parenthesis in this case. So in this case, you're going to have to enclose this in a parenthesis to tell Microsoft Excel, add this first before you do the division. And when you press enter, that will be your correct average grade. And yes, of course, just like last time, you can in fact copy this, highlight all of this, and then paste all of that. And Microsoft Excel, of course, will adjust the cell references according to the location of where you pasted the formula. And you have the average grade of all of the students for those 5 quizzes. You can also do it this way. You can perform actually multi-step calculations using the cell references. So let me first remove all of these average grades, alright? So these are all blank cells again. We already know that this cell is, we already know that this cell is addition, all right? This cell is already the sum of all of these other cells. So what we can do, in fact, is, again, press equals, and then we just take this cell. Instead of adding all of the other cells together, we can just take this cell, because this is already the sum, and then divide that by 5. And when you press enter, you will have the exact same answer as what you did with a while ago. And of course, you can also copy that and paste all of this, and you will have the same average. So in the Philippines, we already have, of course, deped transmutation, right? But there are still some schools in the Philippines which still uses, as a part of their calculation of grades, still uses the base 50 calculation. If you remember what base 50 is, right? Just a review, it is score divided by items times 50 plus 50. So how do you do that in Microsoft Excel? Say, for example, that all of these quizzes, these are the raw quiz scores, but let's say, for example, that all of these quizzes have a perfect score of 10, all right? So let's have these as your raw scores, and let's say for these columns over here, you want to have the base 50 average of these quizzes. So what do you do? Again, score divided by items, which is 10, times 50 plus 50. So equals. So you want to do score divided by items first. So you enclose that in a parenthesis. So, whoops, sorry. So score, all right. So you want to do quiz number 1 first. Score divided by items, which is 10, all right. And then next calculation is times 50. Times 50, you want to enclose that in a parenthesis, because the next item for calculation now is plus 50. And so the base 50 form of 6 over 10 is 80. All right. And in fact, yes, of course, you can in fact copy all of this and then paste it to the right. All right. If you paste it to the right, you will notice, my dear viewers, that the cell reference has now adjusted from, the cell reference in this case was B2. Because you copy-pasted it 1 cell to the right, the cell reference is also adjusted 1 cell to the right. So this is in fact the base 50 form of quiz number 2 for this particular student. Alright? Copy it 1 cell further, and you also have that. Copy it 1 cell further, and you have, in this case, this is E2. So in essence, what you can actually do is, you can just enter it once, and then you can, of course, copy paste that, and you can finish this calculation in mere seconds. Now, what I just showed you, my dear viewers, is a form of calculation wherein you have the mixing of cell references, in this case, the mixing of a variable B2 and constants, alright? So you have 10 as a constant, you have 50 as a constant, and you have 50 as a constant. So that is an example of a calculation using a mix of variables and constants. Please note that cell references can in fact be used to cross between sheets, alright? So say, for example, this is where the raw scores of the quizzes are, but we want to do the base 50 calculations on the other sheet. So say, for example, we now, the raw scores are in sheet 3. Please take note, it's in sheet 3. Look at the lower left corner of the screen, it's in sheet 3. Let's copy all of these names and paste them to sheet 5. So yeah, thank you Microsoft Excel for adjusting the column size. And then let's copy the headers over here so that we have headers. Now, I want the base 50 form, or the base 50 percentage of these scores on the next sheet. So what do? I do this. So I press the equal sign, all right? And then I click on the sheet that I want to reference to, in this case, sheet 3. And then I press on the cell that I want to reference to. You will notice that Microsoft Excel has now labeled this cell reference as the name of the sheet, and then an exclamation point, and then the cell on that sheet. So that's how it works. So let's do the calculation now. So score divided by the number of items, which is 10, okay, and then times 50 times 50 plus 50. All right. So when I press enter, so I'm at sheet 5 now. This is now quiz number 1 from the other sheet, alright, in base 50 form. In fact, the same concept applies when I copy paste this. When I copy this and paste it to that, you will notice that Microsoft Excel has in fact adjusted the cell references one sheet to the right because I copy pasted one sheet to the right, and it is still referencing from the same sheet as the previous one. So in fact, I can actually copy this one formula and apply it to all 1,000 cells, because that's 200 names times 5 quizzes, to all 1,000 cells, and you can have your result instantly. So do all basic calculations work? Not necessarily, because just like math has certain errors, Microsoft Excel also has its fair share of errors. First of all, you cannot add text data. You cannot do any calculations with text data. Take for example, this is the first name of a student and this is the student's last name. So it's instinctive for a person to think, siguro if I add these together, what I'm gonna get is the full name of the student. So let's try that. So A1 plus B1 is equal to value error, because these are not values and Microsoft Excel cannot add them together. And because you cannot add two text data cells together, you also cannot add text and values together. Say for example, this text data and then let's say the value data 123, you cannot take that and add it to this, because the error you're gonna get is also a value error. You cannot add text and values together. So you cannot add them, but you can in fact combine them. So how do you combine text together, or how do you combine text and values? That is our next lesson. Please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss that lesson when it in fact comes out. Microsoft Excel also cannot divide by 0. So let's try that. Let's put 5 and then 0 here. If we try A1 divided by B1, press enter, you will get a divide by 0 error. Microsoft Excel also cannot do a square root of a negative number. Say for example, if you have for example the square root of 100, alright, the answer is going to be 10. But if you try the square root of negative 100, negative 100 is written as such, and then negative 100 looks like that, and then you have the square root of that, the error you will get is a number error. Microsoft Excel cannot do a square root of a negative number. There are in fact other errors in Microsoft Excel which we will talk about in a later lesson. So once again, please subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss that lesson when it comes out. Now, I'm teaching basic calculations because basic calculations is the foundation for functions later on. It's very hard to learn functions later on if you cannot manage even basic calculations. But admittedly, even basic calculations have its own weaknesses. One example of a weakness is of course that basic calculations cannot adjust to the changing conditions of a worksheet. Say for example, you can see on the screen right now, alright? You can see on the screen right now basic sum calculations for these quizzes, just like what we did a while ago. So if you add all of these quizzes, what you will get is of course 30. But if you insert another quiz here, and this is going to be quiz number 6, alright, you will notice of course that the calculation for the 5 quizzes has not changed at all, even if you add a new score here. That is because the calculations for basic calculations in general does not or do not adjust to changing conditions in the worksheet. So therefore, you will have to change the calculation again to accommodate the change. So that is a basic weakness of basic calculations in Excel. A lot of the weaknesses of basic calculations of Excel is of course remedied by the use of special functions in Excel. For example, instead of doing all of those basic calculations, you can of course use the sum function, as some of you may already know, like so, alright? And when you do this, yes, the sum function will in fact adjust to changing conditions of worksheets if you insert another cell. In other words, the sum function will in fact accommodate the new cell that you entered in the middle of those existing columns. We will talk about the functions and of course the sum function and all of the other functions that are important to us teachers in later lessons. So once again, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those lessons when they in fact come on. One other important weakness of basic calculations is, of course, it cannot handle more complex calculations. For example, deped's transmutation table. Now, some of you may already be wondering, the transmutation table of deped cannot be calculated. It can only be done using index or VLOOKUP. No, the transmutation table can in fact be calculated, but it's not a simple calculation. It will require the use of certain functions. We will get to the calculation of the transmutation table of deped later. But again, it's not something that can be handled by basic calculations. It's a more complex calculation, but it can be done with calculations. So that's it for our lesson on basic calculations in Microsoft Excel. Once again, I am Carlo. This is Carlo Excels. Thank you very much for watching.